So I was scheduled to be a camp speaker, and I had to write my talks. And at that time, I had 3 little kids, and they were running around the house and distracting me. Dad, we need this. Dad, we need that. I'm trying to focus. The phone is ringing. So I said, you know what? I can't do this. So I did what every cowardly husband would do. I just booked myself a hotel room down by the beach. So I went down there and thought, yeah, this is great. I'll be able to focus. So I got my books out. I started to study. I was making some progress on my talks. And I thought, well, I'll take a little break. So I went down to the beach, and I kind of sat there on the sand, put my towel out, and I was by myself. Now, this was a weird experience because I was hardly ever by myself. And I was watching all the people, and I saw the couples holding hands, and I saw the little kids playing in the sand, making sand castles, going in and out of the waves. And I started missing my family a little bit. And I hung out a little longer, and the sun started to set, and it was beautiful, and I was there enjoying it by myself. And so then I went back to my hotel room, and I thought, all right, let me get back to it. So I kept working and again, making some progress on my talks. And it was a little later, but I thought, I'll go out to dinner. I'll treat myself. So I went to a restaurant, and I'm waiting there, and the hostess looked up at me, and she said, how many are in your party, sir? I said, well, just one. She kind of looked at me like, oh, how sad. So she walked me to my table, and I felt like all the eyes in the restaurant had turned. Who's the lonely guy? So I sat down, and I looked at the menu, and I ordered, and I, most people, when you go to a restaurant by yourself, you got a book, or you're on your phone, or something like that. I didn't have anything. I was just kind of sitting there, waiting for my food. And I felt all the eyes of the restaurant were on me. And it seemed like my waitress was spending extra time with the lonely guy at her table. So I was feeling a little bummed, missing my family, what was I thinking? Anyway, I go back, and I'm working a little bit more, and I thought, I tell you what, maybe I'll just go to the hotel jacuzzi, right? That'll put me in a good mood. That'll cheer me up. So I go down to the jacuzzi. Nobody's out there. I get in the jacuzzi, and I'm starting to relax, starting to get the kinks out, unwind, and this young couple comes right in the jacuzzi with me and starts making out. I'm like, seriously? So I got up, checked out, and went home a day early. I couldn't handle it. Too much, right? Well, listen, we all need time alone. We all need our me time. That helps us recharge our batteries and refresh. Nothing wrong with that. But what about the times when we don't want to be alone? What about the times when we just crave companionship and friendship and the interaction of another person? That's what we're going to talk about today in our series on the seasons of life. We're going to talk about that season that most of us have experienced one time or another, and that's the season of loneliness. My former pastor, Chuck Swindoll, described it this way in a way that only he can. He said, loneliness is the most desolate word in all the human language. It plays no favorites, yields no mercy. Crowds only make it worse. Activity only drives it deeper. There simply is no anguish like the consuming anguish of loneliness. Ask the inmate in prison or the soldier thousands of miles overseas, the man sitting in some bar by himself last night, or the divorcee in their apartment. Or what about the one who just buried his or her life partner? Or the couple whose arms ache for the child recently taken from them? Or the single, career-minded person who works all day, comes home, eats, goes to bed, and repeats it day after day after day? Or the married woman who lives with the emotionally absent husband? Who deals with loneliness? Statistics say 1 in 3. But the reality is everybody suffers from loneliness at some point in their life. And that brings us to the Apostle Paul. The Apostle Paul had been given the mission to share about the love of God and the salvation in his Son, Jesus Christ, with the world at that time around the Mediterranean seaboard. And he planted many churches and was making disciples, followers of Jesus. And yet he also experienced many hardships for his work. Many times he was ridiculed. Many times he was imprisoned. Many times they ripped his shirt and flogged him with whips until he was bloodied. They beat him with rods. Several times he was taken outside the city, thrown in a pit, and large stones were thrown upon him. He was left for dead at one point. He had spent several nights alone in the open sea. He had suffered much and known much pain and heartache as a servant of Christ. In 65 AD, the Apostle Paul finds himself in a Roman prison. He's probably in his late 60s. And if you have your note sheets, this is where we're going to start, and I encourage you to follow along. You might have it on your phone or your church app. Paul was facing the end of his life in that prison cell, and he was struggling with loneliness. So he took out his pen, some parchment, and he wrote his final letter, at least the final letter that we have, to his beloved son in the faith, Timothy, who was leading some churches in Ephesus. I'd like to read you our passage today. If you'd like to follow along, it's in 2 Timothy chapter 4, verses 9 to 18. It says this. Paul writes, "Do your best to come to me soon, Timothy. For Demas, in love with this present world, has deserted me and gone to Thessalonica. Crescens has gone to Galatia, Titus to Dalmatia. Luke alone is with me. And get Mark and bring him with you, for he is very useful to me for ministry. Tychicus I have sent to Ephesus. And when you come, bring the cloak that I left with Carpus at Troas, and also the books, and above all, the parchments. Alexander the coppersmith, he did me great harm. The Lord will repay him according to his deeds. Beware of him yourself, for he strongly opposed our message. And at my first offense, no one came to stand by me, but all deserted me. May it not be charged against them. But the Lord stood by me and strengthened me, so that through me the message might be fully proclaimed, and all the Gentiles might hear it. So I was rescued from the lion's mouth. And the Lord will rescue me from every evil deed and bring me safely into his heavenly kingdom. To him be the glory forever and ever. Amen." The final words that we have of the Apostle Paul. Through his words, I see 4 ways that you and I can grow through seasons of loneliness through his example. But before we go on, let's talk with God. Father in heaven, Lord, life brings us all kinds of different seasons. And the season of loneliness is one that tends to touch all of us. I pray, Father, that through the example of your servant Paul, through the power of your word, that you might bring encouragement and hope to those who might be experiencing this season right now. For it's in your Son Jesus' name we pray. And everybody said, Amen. So 4 ways to grow when we're lonely. And the first is this: we need to reach out to faithful friends. And there's nothing like a good friend to cheer us up when we're down, to be there, to come alongside us, to have coffee with, and to just listen. Well, Paul was lonely. He was in chains in this Roman prison. He was suffering at the hands of the Roman Emperor Nero at the time, who was mentally unstable. Matter of fact, Nero blamed the Christians for the fire that consumed much of Rome in 64 AD. He grabbed the Christians and he imprisoned them. He murdered them. He put tar on their bodies and lit his garden with Christians. They were deeply persecuted by Nero. And so here's Paul. He's in jail. No family. He's writing to Timothy, who was his longtime associate and disciple, assistant in the ministry. He wants to write to Timothy to express his love for him, to give him some advice. But as he ends the letter, he reaches out. You could hear the loneliness in Paul's voice as I read you our passage today. He says this in 2 Timothy chapter 4, verses 6 to 7, "For I am already being poured out as a drink offering, and the time of my departure is come." Paul knows the end is near. He knows that being a leader of this Christian faith, that at some point when he appears before the court and the Emperor Nero, he will be made an example of. And he will die. And so he uses the word picture of a drink offering being poured out. In the Old Testament, they would take a sacrifice that was going to be given to the Lord, and they would pour a drink offering, maybe some wine over it, and then it would burn and perish. And Paul is saying, that's what's happening to me. I'm pouring out my life after serving the Lord. I will be a sacrifice to him. Now look what he says in verse 7. "I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith." Man. Let me read that again. Think about your own life. Think about what you want people to remember you for. What's the most important? I've fought the good fight. I've finished the race. I've kept the faith. I don't know about you, but wouldn't that be the best epitaph on your gravestone? I've fought the good fight. I've kept the faith. I've finished the race. That's Paul. But I want to suggest that Paul wasn't overwhelmed by his loneliness. He wasn't overwhelmed by his situation, but he did reach out to his friends for encouragement and for support. And so he says in 2 Timothy 4, 9 through 11, he says, "Now Timothy, do your best to come to me soon." He needs his friendship. He needs his support. Because one of his associates, Demas, who was in love with the present world, has deserted me, Paul says. Went to Thessalonica. One of his other associates involved in ministry was sent to Galatia, another Titus to Dalmatia. Luke alone is with me, Paul says. Remember Luke? He wrote the Gospel of Luke about Jesus. He wrote the book of Acts. Luke was known as a doctor, a physician. Perhaps Luke stayed with Paul to take care of his physical needs while he was in prison in Rome. Tychicus, he says, "And get Mark and bring him with you, for Mark is very useful to me for ministry." So he's reaching out for this young man to be there with him as well. Let me ask you, are you struggling with a season of loneliness? Reach out. Reach out to faithful friends. You know, I remember when my mother died, my brother and I, we were concerned about my dad. They were a very close couple, and my father loved my mom very much. And he was alone in this big 5-bedroom house that all us kids were raised in. And and Dad would call me. He'd say, "Hey, Jim, what are you doing? Can we go golfing this week?" And I have to say, "Dad, I'm working right now. I can't get off." He was lonely. He said, "Well, when's your day off?" I said, "Well, Friday, maybe Saturday, we could go." And we would. And those times encouraged him. My brother lived closer to my father, and he was really good. At any time there was a game on, baseball, basketball, football, whatever, he'd call my dad over and they'd watch the game together. We reached out to my father during his season of loneliness, and he was reaching out to us. I was real excited when he became one of those ranger guys at a golf course, that tools around in the golf cart, making sure golfers don't, hit each other with golf balls. I don't know what they do, but he was doing that, and he made friends. But he reached out. He didn't allow his loneliness to consume him. In the book of Ecclesiastes, chapter 4, verses 9 to 10, it reminds us of the importance of having good friends, of not going through life on our own. And if we find ourselves in that position of being alone, that we make the effort to reach out to others. So it says in Ecclesiastes 4, verse 9, 2 are better than one, because they have a good reward for their toil. For if one falls, the other can lift up his fellow. But woe to him who is alone when he falls and has no other to lift him up. See, there's an importance of having friends, of having somebody there next to you to support you, to encourage you. I know that some of you are experiencing loneliness right now. Some of you might be saying, "Man, I wish I had my friends." Let me speak to you from my heart. I really wish that you would take the next step, get out of your comfort zone, take a risk, and get involved in one of our small groups, one of our life groups. I have people come up and they share with me what they're going through, their loneliness, and I ask, "Are you in a life group?" And they'll say no. And then I'll discipline them. No, I'm kidding. But I'll say, "Look, come on. Get involved in a life group, all right? This is a place where you can build relationships, make friends, go hang out, have fun, pray for each other, support each other." It helps with the loneliness. Second way to grow when we're lonely, we need to remain active. We need to remain active, church. The first temptation when we're lonely or if we've lost somebody is we just want to sit there and do nothing, right? We want to isolate. We just want to, we don't feel like doing anything. It's heavy. It's painful. We're hurting. Well, Paul didn't do that. What did Paul do? He chose to remain active in that prison cell. So he says in 2 Timothy 4:13, "Now, Timothy, when you come, bring the cloak that I left with Carpus at Troas. Also the books, and above all, the parchments." See, Paul wanted this cloak. I'm sure his prison cell got cold when winter came. A cloak had long sleeves. It would provide him warmth. Paul wanted to take care of himself. And then he wanted the books and the parchments. He wanted to read. He wanted to write. He wanted to stay mentally sharp as he was serving the Lord, even in prison. See, human nature is that we don't take care of ourselves very well when we're lonely, do we? And people have to check up on us. "Hey, have you walked today? Have you read? Have you done anything? Or have you just sit there on the couch with the TV clicker, clicking all day," right? That's not healthy. Activity helps us focus on something else, whether it's a sport or a hobby. Maybe you take up gardening, or you take up hiking or swimming or knitting. One lady said, "Man, yeah, we got people who've joined our knitting, our quilting group here. That's a great way to make friends if you're lonely. You can quilt me a t-shirt." I don't know if you can even do that, but go ahead. Quilt away, okay? Make some friends in the quilting group. The point is, remain active. Doreen was in her 20s when I met her, and I was a youth pastor at a church, and she said, I just went through a divorce, and I've been sitting in my apartment alone, and it's not good. She said, I need to do something. And I wondered if I could work with your high school students. And so we prayed about it, and we brought her on, and we gave her a group of freshman girls. And she was a little hesitant at first, but she got to know them. And she built relationships with them. She came to Sunday mornings. She came to midweek youth group time. She had her own discipleship time with her girls. She went to all of their activities, their games, their plays. She counseled them when they had drama in their lives with boys and things like that. And I watched her love on these girls for 4 years. And it made a difference in her life. She wasn't as lonely as she was. She was active. She was serving the Lord and making an impact in the lives of others. And I want to encourage you to do the same. Remain active. Utilize your time. Take care of yourself. Remember, our bodies aren't ours. Our bodies, our minds, belong to the Lord. If you're a follower of Jesus, God himself, through the Holy Spirit, indwells you, right? The Bible tells us in 1 Corinthians chapter 3, verse 16, don't you know that you are God's temple, God's house, God's tent, and that God's Spirit dwells in you? If God's Spirit dwells in us, we have a responsibility to take care of the house, right? We take care of our physical bodies. We take care of our minds. We got to do that during times of loneliness. There's a third way to grow when we're lonely, and that is we need to release our hurt to the Lord. Sometimes seasons of loneliness can be intensified when someone has hurt us. Now, the response is our choice. We can just go off in a corner by ourselves, have a pity party. We can rehearse our pain, let it fester, just keep to ourselves. And you know what that's going to result in? Anger and bitterness. Anger and bitterness. I took a bunch of high school kids. We were going door to door in some neighborhoods in Pasadena, California, down south. And we were collecting food for needy families. We'd go up to the door saying, hey, do you have any cans of food that we could bring to the shelter, and that'll help meet some needs? And people would drop all kinds of cans of food in our bags. We came up to one door, and lady opened up the door, and the students went into their routine. Hi, we're a bunch of kids from a local church, and we're collecting food. Would you like to donate something for the needy? And this woman looked suspiciously at the kids, and she said, well, what church are you from? And the kids go, well, we're from Church of the Open Door. Immediately, her face just went into a frown. My husband and I don't like that church. The high school kids, they didn't know how to respond, like, sorry. And then she went into her pain. She said, we've hardly been back to church since we served as the youth pastors at that church some years ago. They treated my husband and I terribly. The people were mean. The people were unfriendly. They were unkind. They weren't generous. One of the kids goes, so I guess you won't be giving us any canned food? The lady goes, I don't have anything. She slammed the door on him. Whoa. The kids walked away, and I was listening to a conversation. One said, man, that lady was bitter. Another kid goes, man, that lady needs Jesus. I mean, she was lonely, obviously. She was hurt, but she didn't work through it. She didn't release her hurt to the Lord. And that's so important that we do that. And it begins with forgiveness. One person put it this way: forgiveness is the scent a rose gives once it's been stepped on. You ever been stepped on by somebody? A lot of us have. It's our choice how we're going to respond. We can fight back, step on them, or we can choose to release our hurt to the Lord and forgive. Now, in a healthy way, the Apostle Paul mentioned those who had hurt him in his letter, but he released them to the Lord. Look what he said in 2 Timothy 4, 14 to 16. He said, Alexander the coppersmith did me great harm. The Lord will repay him according to his deeds. And beware of him yourself, Timothy, for he strongly opposed our message. Notice, Paul doesn't say, Alexander the coppersmith did me great harm, and man, I'm going to get him back. Timothy, make sure you get vengeance for me. He didn't say that. He said, no, the Lord will take care of him according to his deeds for opposing the message of the gospel that we were sharing. A lot of people think that this guy, Alexander, opposed the Apostle Paul to the point where he's the one that got Paul thrown into prison, that ultimately led to his death. Paul goes on in verse 17. He said, or verse 16, he talks about his defense before the Roman court. And he says, at my first defense, nobody came to stand by me. All deserted me. Wow. You could feel the loneliness in his words. All deserted me. But look what he says. May it not be charged against them. He's praying for those Christians who were in Rome, who knew that their leader, the man of God, the Apostle Paul, was going to be facing a court trial. You would think that they would come and support him, but they were too afraid. And they didn't. And they left him on his own. I don't know about you, but unfortunately, part of this life means that we're going to get hurt by others. It's going to happen. So the question is, how can we release our hurt to the Lord? And the starting point is this: we need to recognize God's presence and strength is with us. God never leaves us. God never forsakes us, and he promises to be with us, to fill that void, to fill that gap. The Apostle Paul sought the Lord. In verse 17, he says, but the Lord stood by me. Everybody else deserted me. But Timothy, I want you to know the Lord was there for me. The Lord stood by me and strengthened me. I love Paul's faith. Man, I pray that's a faith that I can have. I pray it's a faith that you can have, especially during those times when it's tough to find a friend, when the kids aren't calling back, when nobody's available to hang out with us. Seek the Lord. He's there with you, right there. And he will strengthen you. The Bible tells us in Psalm 34:18, the Lord is near to the brokenhearted and saves the crushed in spirit. That's a promise. That's a promise, church. There's a final way to grow during seasons of loneliness, and that is, I recommend responding to the needs of others. You respond to the needs of others, and you're going to get your eyes off yourself and onto God. And your whole perspective is going to change. See, often in a season of loneliness, whether we want to or not, whether it's intentional or not, we can become so self-absorbed, right? It's just all about our situation, our circumstance, our loss, our pain. How about we move outside of ourselves and get our eyes on someone else and encourage them? Serve them. Love them. Be Christ's ambassador to them. That'll help the healing process, I guarantee you. 1 Peter chapter 4, verse 10 reminds us that everybody in Jesus Christ has been given spiritual gifts to be used by God, not to just hang on to. 1 Peter 4:10, as each has received a gift, use it. Use it to serve one another as good stewards of God's varied grace. You might have a gift of mercy or encouragement. You might have a gift of service or helps. You might have a gift of teaching. You might have a gift of administration or leadership, whatever your gifts might be. If you're not using them, you're not active and you're not building into the life of somebody else, right? So we use those gifts. We take that step. We engage. I guarantee you, if you do that, you're going to see a change in your whole perspective of what you're going and what you're dealing with. Paul did that. Let me read you 2 Timothy 4:17, where he says, okay, the Lord stood by me, and the Lord strengthened me. Why? So that through me, the message of salvation in Jesus Christ might be fully proclaimed, and all the Gentiles might hear it. He's saying, while I'm in that courtroom, God was with me, He strengthened me, and I was able to be His witness to all these movers and shakers in Roman society. They heard the truth of God and salvation through His Son Jesus. Paul didn't just let his loneliness defeat him. He responded to the needs of others. He was determined to continue sharing Christ to the very end. Wow. How about us? We might think to ourselves, you know what? Nobody cares. All right. Go care about somebody else. Get involved in one of our prayer ministries. Go find out who needs to be visited at home or in the hospital. Get involved in our Living Well ministry to our community, people that need food and clothing and resources. Nobody cares about you. Go care about somebody else and watch God do a work in your own life. You might say, you know what? Nobody's ministering to my needs. You know what I'm going to say? Go minister the needs of somebody else. You got a gift. Pull the trigger. Use it. Right? You can bring a smile to a child's face in our children's ministry. You can get really active if you join our junior high ministry. Right? Whatever it might be, get involved in a ministry. I was down in downtown LA one time, and I was volunteering to serve at a homeless shelter, and we were going to serve lunch, and I was assigned to go help the cook in the kitchen. So I went into the kitchen, and all of a sudden, this pretty large lady is coming right at me with a big bowl of stew, and she's running down the aisle, and she says, "Get out of my way, Mama's in the kitchen." And I'm like, whoa. So I backed up. She looked at me, she goes, "That's what I said." And she get out there, and she put in the stew, and she's feeding people, and I'm sitting in the kitchen not knowing what to do. She came over and she said, "What are you standing there for?" I said, "Well, I was told to come in and help Mama." "Are you Mama?" She says, "What do you think?" I said, "Okay." So she got me working, and I was washing dishes, and then she started telling me her story. She said, "I've lived in this city my whole life. I've had kids and grandkids, and my husband died, and I wasn't able to spend time with them. They were too busy. And I was just sitting in my apartment by myself. And finally, I prayed to the Lord, and the Lord said, 'Get up and go serve me.' So she said, I came down here. They needed a cook. She said, 'I can't do a lot, but Mama can cook.' I said, 'Okay.' So she says, and ever since, I've been volunteering down here. And I get to make a difference in the lives of those people who are living on the streets. And Jesus blesses me. and I'm not lonely anymore.